The life of Andy Warhol is perhaps better documented than that of any other artist in the history of art. And that's because, being confident in his own genius, he was simply obsessed with the idea of giving future biographers material about himself. Every few days, he would scoop up all his everyday things into another box, put a date on it, and call it a time capsule. Number so and so. After his death, 641 boxes were found in his house, filled with all sorts of junk, from ticket stubs, bills, and even food scraps to worn belts he wore after the assassination attempt. Besides that, he never parted with his tape recorder, which he called his wife and used to record all his thoughts. He also recorded all his phone conversations, and when that wasn't possible, he asked his assistant to take notes on them. After his death, all these recordings were sent to his hometown of Pittsburgh and were kept there for many years, waiting for a biographer crazy and meticulous enough to organize all this insane stuff. And only a few years ago, such a person arrived. That person was Black Gopnik, the leading art critic of the Washington Post, and he created a 900-page biography that reveals to us many things that were previously unknown. Today I will share with you this, in my opinion, the most truthful story of Warhol's life, which is quite different from the official version. Warhol liked to call himself self-taught, but that's not entirely true. He received a pretty good education as a designer, although not an artistic one, but it gave him a solid foundation. As soon as he graduated from college in Pittsburgh, he immediately headed to New York, where his career began. He was 20 years old at the time. The official version describes Andy as a modest, shy guy, but that's far from the truth. In reality, he was bold, and I even think brazenly audacious, in some cases almost sociopathic. Soon you'll see it for yourself. Since childhood, Warhol was obsessed with stars and fashion magazines, and his whole life's goal was to enter the highest circle of stars. All his intense activity would revolve around this goal, which didn't match the image of a modest boy at all. At first, in New York, he rented a cockroach-infested apartment in Manhattan with 3 other friends, trying to break into commercial design and illustration in his chosen field. I was very enterprising, such as at the Museum of Modern Art. Warhol went straight up to an employee and offered to design Christmas cards for the gift shop, and he got the job. He also went to the bookstore and studied the most interesting record covers, then started calling all the art directors, offering them his services, already understanding their taste. He was like a little check tank, recalls one of his friends. Just a couple of days later, he got his first order, and it was for Harper's Bazaar, even though during the interview a cockroach fell out of his folder. As you can see, modesty and shyness are qualities that were hardly characteristic of Warhol. This intense activity would soon bear fruit, even though many people who met him considered him strange, a strange little freak. According to one of them, he didn't like his appearance and suffered a lot because of it. He had terrible skin, unevenly pigmented and covered in pimples, thin hair that by the age of 30 had almost all fallen out, and a bulbous nose. A little later, he would get a rhinoplasty and start wearing that famous wig, gluing it to his head every morning. All of this, of course, left its mark on the artist's personality, especially considering that he was homosexual. In Warhol's case, his insecurities turned into boldness, self-expression, and even a carelessness bordering on sociopathy, which ultimately allowed him to take actions and make statements that others would never dare to. He was a pathological liar, like anyone who seeks to compensate for physical shortcomings. For example, he claimed that he was a virgin until the age of 25, or even his whole life. However, there is evidence that he suffered from more than one venereal disease. He lied for fun. In one interview, he falsely claimed that he was born in Cleveland to the von Warhol family. He chose to speak in a deliberately soft, almost whispering manner, but then could suddenly shout, startling his conversation partner, and enjoyed the effect. If someone asked how he was, he might say, "I'm fine," but then, coming closer, add, "But I have diarrhea," and watch their reaction. Because of these antics, many thought he was foolish, but some suspected it was just a well-thought-out trick. The first notable success came to Warhol after 6 years in New York in 1955. He managed to land a contract with a shoe company for $12,000, a huge amount of money at that time. By that time, he had come up with an illustration technique that made him stand out among other designers and brought him several major commissions. He would draw outlines with ink on paper, then press the sheet against another one, creating a print from the still wet ink. The result was uneven, seemingly random lines, which he would then color in. And the clients really liked the result, including magazines like Glamour, Vogue, Harper's and Bazaar at that time. He also created illustrations for the super popular series of Spanish language learning books by Margarita Madrigal, which were later reprinted many times. So, after 10 years in New York, by the age of 30, Warhol was already a very good, extremely active, and quite successful designer and illustrator. However, he wanted more. By the mid-1950s, conceptual art began to develop in the United States with stars like abstract impressionists Jackson Pollock, William de Kooning, as well as Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns. They used images from comics, movies, and advertising. In this environment, Warhol was considered an outsider due to his homoerotic drawings and advertising illustrations. This upset him a lot. He felt that artists and critics were ignoring him. He desperately needed to figure out how to break into this coveted environment. Gopnik claims that Warhol's moment of insight happened in 1962, when the future artist, among friends, complained that all the pop culture images had already been used and asked them to recall ones that no one had used yet. A decorator named Morel Latou said she had an idea, but she wanted $50 for it. Warhol wrote a check immediately, and she advised him to find something that would be widely recognizable. Campbell's soup was heavily advertised at the time, with ads resembling a soup can seen everywhere. And that's how the idea for his first pop art painting with Campbell's soups was born. According to the official version, the decorator asked Warhol what he liked, and he answered Campbell's soup and money. This version gives the birth of the idea to the artist himself, but Gopnik claims that the eureka moment of Warhol does not actually belong to him. And there's nothing wrong with that. We've already seen with the examples of Picasso and Malevich that most often it's not the idea itself, but the ability to develop and sell it that become the key factors for success. Warhol fully possessed that very gift of shocking public relations or kitsch, which helps to sell art to the public. Gopnik calls him a great sponge, meaning his ability to absorb and process ideas. Anyway, the next day, Andy went to the finest supermarket and bought one can of every kind of Campbell's soup they had. And soon he created a montage of all 32 varieties of soup, which today hangs in New York's MoMA. Speaking of meanings, this work is said to challenge the ordinary. Following the postulates of the ready-made, Warhol tries to turn something extremely banal and familiar into a sublime substance of art, declaring that even the most ordinary things can become art through the artist's touch. 32 types of soup for the first painting later lead to the idea of multiplying the pop object. And the idea of multiplying banality, increasing its very routine nature, becomes his trademark, which he will reproduce more than once. That's why there are 50 cans of soup, 100 cans, 200 cans. After the Campbell's soups, other famous pop paintings by Warhol quickly followed. Green bottles, Coca-Colas, 192 $1 bills, a box of soap pads. Brillo, Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, Marlon Brando and Elvis's. He starts with drawings, then transitions to silkscreen printing. He gets the idea that a technical innovation in illustration might work this time as well. He begins studying and utilizing silkscreen printing, a technique known globally before his time. The method itself was as follows. A nylon mesh coated with a reagent was stretched over a frame, and light from a projector with a photographic slide inserted was directed onto it. The lid parts hardened, while the rest washed away with water. This created a stencil, which was then placed on the fabric and painted over with a roller from above. A separate stencil was made for each color. That's exactly how all of Warhol's famous paintings were made. As you can see, nothing was done by hand in them. It's more like typographic color printing. Warhol, hungry for fame, devises a clever strategy. He starts reworking photographs of celebrities from magazines and newspapers in this way. He simply takes a photo of Elvis Presley or Liz Taylor and runs it through his machine. Nick Safronoff was not the first to paint celebrity portraits, send them as gifts, and claim they were commissioned by the subjects. Andy Warhol did it before, and he wasn't shy about it. But this trick might not have worked if it weren't for the sudden tragic death of Marilyn Monroe, which shocked the whole world in that very year, 1962. The very next day after the star's death, Warhol exhibited his famous diptych, Marilyn. It's unknown whether he worked all night or if this portrait was already finished. However, the appearance of the portrait was incredibly timely and caused a lot of buzz in the wake of the tragedy. Soon, he would create multiple statues of Liberty and Mona Lisas. In my view, he followed the same concept of using popular images without diminishing them to mass-produced postcards. All his works, except for the first Campbell's soup cans, were silk screens that he did not make by hand himself. The photographs were taken by someone else, and his assistant Malanga handled the technical aspect. Until 1972, during the most productive period of his career, Warhol did not create a single drawn work. Although a little later, he started taking Polaroid photos himself and turning those photos into silk screens. At this time, he began to gain fame. The Marilyn Monroe prints sparked conversations about Warhol, though not favorably. He was known as a celebrity-obsessed flatterer and generally considered a peculiar and quite disagreeable individual. At 30, he was known in television interviews for putting two fingers to his lips and saying something like but nothing more than that while the cameras were rolling. Not the most pleasant sight. For live interviews, he often brought along Malanga, his assistant, and said, "Why don't you ask my assistant Jerry Malanga a few questions? He painted many of my paintings." And here he wasn't lying. However, he wasn't well liked among artists. At the end of the 60s, at one of the parties, a drunk de Kooning said to Warhol, "You're a killer of art, you're a killer of beauty, you're even a killer of laughter. I think this attitude hurt Warhol, but he couldn't show it because he had already gotten used to the role of an eccentric artist and had basically become a slave to his own antics. He puts on an exhibition at the Stable Gallery, where he basically set up a warehouse out of Brillo soapboxes. Visitors had to wander through the labyrinths, bumping into each other. The exhibition had a stunning effect. People flocked in, but no one bought anything. People still went to Warhol as if he were a weirdo, an amusing spectacle to chuckle at. However, this made Warhol's name more recognizable. And his income reaches $100,000 a year, which allows him to buy a loft in Manhattan, where there used to be a hat factory. It is this space that he transforms into that very factory, which will become his workshop studio and the most popular hangout spot in New York. He covers the entire space with aluminum foil and spray silver paint and starts throwing loud bohemian parties there with drugs, sex, and wild performances. Warhol and his factory start appearing in society columns, and soon he achieves his coveted goal. Celebrities begin appearing among his guests, finally granting him access to the elite social circle. The factory becomes both a showcase and a production workshop, turning out up to 80 prints a day. The business is growing. And that's when he starts going everywhere, with a tape recorder named Zena, which gave us all the information below. Despite his success, Warhol's restlessness drives him to want to cover everything. He forms his own punk band, monstrous in sound, which he plays in the background at his parties, more to get on people's nerves than to entertain them. All he wants is for people to talk about him, no matter what they say. "Always leave them wanting less," declares Warhol in response to complaints about the band's monstrous sound. The band broke up a year later, but Warhol already had a new passion, film, which would occupy him for the next 4 years. During this time, he made over 100 films, pretentious and unbearably boring. For example, the 8-hour film How His Lover Sleeps, or the 12-hour specially slowed down film in which simply 8 people came to the first premiere, 2 of whom left after an hour. Warhol, a hopeless poser, does everything he can to promote his brand, and soon after a tragic incident, he also gains a reputation as a sort of Mephistopheles, luring his young friends to certain doom. The young dancer Freddie Herco, after another party at the factory, took a bath and some lysergic acid diethylamide, then went out the window to the music of Mozart. When Warhol was informed about the death, he simply said that he regretted not being there to film the fall. This phrase earned him a reputation as an insensitive freak, an image reinforced by a series of paintings he released at the same time. In them, he dwells on accidents, human injuries, and electric chairs. Gopnik believes that Warhol was simply trying to shock the public, and I agree with him. It seems to me that at some point the artist became so fused with this posturing, this image of a cynical freak, that it became impossible to step back. And I doubt he even wanted to. This image sold both him and his paintings perfectly. He would go on to use this strange joke more than once. At that time he got together with a rich girl, Edie Sedgwick, who adored him and followed him everywhere like a shadow, paying his bills. And when she eventually ran away from him with Bob Dylan, he jealously said, "What do you think? When will Edie kill herself? I hope she'll let us know so we can film it." 6 years later, Sedgwick died of a barbiturate overdose. He would say the same thing about himself after the famous assassination attempt, saying that he wished he could have been there to film it all. The assassination attempt occurred in 1968. Warhol is already 40 years old. He is famous and surrounded by literally hundreds of admirers and questionable companions. On June 3rd, Valeria Solanas, the founder and sole member of the organization advocating for male castration. Offended that Warhol had given her too little screen time in his films, she got out of the elevator at the factory and shot the artist several times, also hitting his friend with a bullet. Hours later in Times Square, she told a confused officer, "Police are looking for me. I'm a child of flowers. He controlled too much of my life. Warhol didn't press charges, and she got only 3 years. You get more time for stealing a car. The wound was terrible. 2 holes in the arc of the diaphragm muscle. The esophagus was separated from the stomach, so food and stomach acid was spilling out from below. The liver, whose left lobe was crushed and bleeding, and the spleen were completely destroyed. Warhol fell into a coma, but survived, and after recovering, he began to get rid of his questionable entourage. And they, feeling unnecessary, began to leave him. But he gained more fashionable friends, such as Lee Radziwill and Mick Jagger, bought an estate in Montauk and a chocolate brown Rolls Royce. And a summer house. In 1969, he launches his own magazine where celebrities interview other celebrities. The magazine helps him attract clients to his new business, with silkscreen portraits of friends, patrons, and various celebrities, among whom were Gianni Versace, the Shah of Iran, Chris Evert, and Dolly Parton. But all of this is commissioned work. Such portraits, technically original and undoubtedly valuable, did not add anything new. They just became another reproduction of the technique. A crisis began to emerge in Warhol's work. If you create the value of your work through hype, kitsch, and shock, you always risk that the public will only appreciate you as long as you entertain them. Without a factory of crazy actions and shocking statements, Warhol's star began to fade at the end of the 70s. He places an ad in the newspaper, promising to sign any item brought to him for a fee, and gives his real phone number. This bold and funny ad might seem like just another stunt, but it's not the first in history. Like Dali or Picasso, at the end of his career, Warhol decides to sell the most valuable thing he has, his name, by signing it on empty objects. Like the legendary King Midas, he watches as they turn to gold from the touch of his genius. He says, "Making money is art, working is art, and good business is the best art." And this finally cements his reputation as a businessman. Warhol goes back to the early days when he was designing advertisements and creates the Andy Warhol Design Studio, selling his designs now for a completely different kind of money. For example, ice cream for Schrafts, a limited edition bottle for Absolute Vodka, and things like that. And it's great design, but is it art? In the early 80s, he started collaborating with the rising art world star Jean-Michel Basquiat. Gopnik suggests that the young prodigy reminds the 50-year-old Warhol of himself. However, Warhol's reputation now actually harms the collaboration. A critic wrote that their joint work looked like one of Warhol's typical manipulations, in which he contemptuously underestimates the intelligence of the public. Basquiat, meanwhile, looks like an all-too-willing accomplice. In the end, Basquiat distanced himself from Warhol, and this deeply hurt the artist. He writes in his diary, "I just wanted to hurry home, do some painting, and stop making society portraits." But of course, he doesn't do any of that because the portraits brought in money which he loved to spend. He bought a handful of diamonds and would walk around jingling them in his pocket. Every day he would visit antique shops and buy furniture, filling his entire house with it. One day he gave a portrait of Marilyn Monroe to his friend, but his friend asked, "Admit it, deep down, you know this isn't art, right?" Warhol replied, "Wrap it in brown paper, put it in the far corner of your closet, and one day it will be worth $1 million. He was only off by 100 times. In 2008, this portrait was sold for $100 million. Warhol died at the age of 58 from gangrene caused by that very gunshot wound. All the years after the assassination attempt, he wore special belts to keep his internal organs in place. A whole collection of these belts, painted in various cheerful colors, has been preserved in the time capsules. And just like the endless clutter left by the artist in the time capsules, his legacy now seems chaotic and controversial to us. But no matter how questionable Warhol's character and legacy may seem to us, as a personality in art, he is undoubtedly prominent. He managed to do what very few could: sell mediocrity at a cosmic price. His death finally made his favorite joke a reality. There were enough people there who managed to film it.